You think 1970s African American cooking was just fried chicken and collard greens? Think again. Black kitchens across America created dishes so inventive and soulful that losing them means losing pieces of our heritage. Let's dig into 60 recipes from the 1970s we want back. Macaroni with evaporated milk was the humble cousin of mac and cheese, made without luxury but with all the heart. Families mixed boiled pasta with a can of milk, a pinch of salt, and maybe a bit of butter if they could spare it. It thickened into a creamy dish that looked rich even when it was not. Some stirred in black pepper or dried herbs to make it special. It was a dish made to stretch, to fill bellies without breaking budgets. Children never cared that it lacked real cheese. To them, it was just good. For parents, it was a reminder that love could turn even a bare pantry into something that tasted like comfort. In small kitchens, mothers stirred the pot with quiet pride, knowing they were making something that would last until payday. The smell was gentle but comforting, warm like a promise that hunger would have to wait. The sound of spoons clinking in metal bowls was its own kind of music. Families gathered close, sharing laughter over a meal that cost next to nothing but meant everything. It was proof that simplicity could still taste like home, that love could flavor even the plainest food. Fried fish sandwiches on white bread became Friday tradition in Black communities, with whiting or catfish fillets creating meals that cost less than hamburgers but satisfied more deeply. Fresh or frozen fish was seasoned with salt, pepper, and hot sauce, dredged in cornmeal, then fried until crispy and golden in hot oil that made entire kitchens smell amazing. The fillets were placed on soft white bread with hot sauce, pickles, and sometimes thin spreads of mayonnaise, creating sandwiches that were simple but absolutely delicious every time. Fish provided lean protein and omega-3 fatty acids, making these sandwiches nutritious as well as affordable for families watching budgets carefully. In Catholic neighborhoods, Friday fish fries became community events, with churches and families gathering to cook and eat together while strengthening bonds. In the 1970s, whiting was among the cheapest fish available, often costing less per pound than chicken at local markets. Fried fish sandwiches represented community, tradition, and the joy of simple food done right. Cornbread dressing, made from dried-out bread and day-old cornbread, turned stale leftovers into the savory stuffing that anchored Thanksgiving plates throughout Black communities. Mothers saved bread ends, biscuit pieces, and cornbread scraps in bags for weeks before the holiday, letting them air dry until rock hard so they'd absorb maximum liquid without turning mushy. On Thanksgiving morning, those saved breads would be crumbled and mixed with sautéed celery, onions, and sage, then moistened with chicken broth made from boiling backs and necks. Some women added finely chopped giblets, while others relied purely on vegetables and herbs for flavor. The dressing had to be moist enough to hold together but dry enough to crisp on top when baked. This wasn't bread cubes from expensive store-bought loaves, but carefully accumulated scraps transformed through skill. The golden brown top provided textural contrast to soft interior. For Black families, cornbread dressing represented resourcefulness, elevated to tradition. Okra and tomato winter stew was a humble pot that brought together two ingredients. Black families knew how to stretch through lean months. Canned tomatoes were cheap and lasted forever, and frozen okra kept well enough to make it into most winter meals. Mothers combined them with onions, seasoning, and sometimes a leftover bone or bit of smoked meat if the house had some. The stew bubbled slowly, thickening as the okra softened and released its juices, turning the tomatoes into a sauce that coated every spoonful. Kids sometimes teased each other about the texture of okra, but they still showed up with bowls in hand when the smell filled the house. It was warm, savory, and surprisingly filling, a dish that carried families through the days when fresh produce was impossible to afford. Served with rice or cornbread, the stew became a complete meal, one that tasted far richer than its ingredients suggested. Okra and tomato stew was a winter companion, steady and dependable. Biscuits made fresh on Thanksgiving morning became the warm, buttery bread that mopped up gravy and made every bite more satisfying, prepared from basic ingredients that most kitchens already had. Black mothers mixed flour, baking powder, salt, and lard into simple dough that baked into flaky, tender biscuits, golden on top and soft inside. The key was handling the dough gently and not overworking it, lessons passed down from grandmothers who'd perfected biscuit making through decades of practice. A single batch using 5 pounds of flour produced enough biscuits to feed 20 people with leftovers for turkey sandwiches the next day. Some women brushed the tops with melted margarine for extra richness, while others kept them plain to let the flaky layers speak for themselves. Children would sneak biscuits while they cooled, unable to resist that combination of buttery exterior and steamy interior. Ham bone and bean soup transformed the leftover bone from Sunday's ham into entirely new meals that fed families for days with minimal additional ingredients needed for completion. The bone was placed in large pots with dried beans, onions, celery, carrots, and water, then simmered for hours until the beans were creamy and the remaining ham fell off the bone into the soup. The marrow and residual meat flavored the entire pot, creating rich soup that tasted like prosperity despite costing almost nothing to make from leftovers. This represented the ultimate waste-nothing philosophy, ensuring every part of expensive Sunday ham served multiple purposes throughout the week for maximum value. The soup was served with cornbread or crackers, providing complete protein from beans and ham combined in perfect proportions. In the 1970s, dried beans cost pennies and lasted months in pantries, making them reliable staples for families on impossibly tight budgets. Ham bone and bean soup showed how one ingredient could serve families repeatedly when prepared thoughtfully. Okra and tomato stirrup was one of those dishes that started as a side and ended up stealing the whole show. Fresh or canned tomatoes met sliced okra in a single skillet, cooking down together until they became soft, sticky, and full of flavor. The texture was thick and rich, the kind that clung to every spoonful of rice or cornbread. The smell was tangy and green, sharp at first, but mellowing into something soothing. It was food that reminded families of southern summers and hard work in the fields. Even those who swore they did not like okra found themselves asking for seconds. The trick was to cook it slow, letting the tomatoes do their work until everything melted together into a perfect mess of goodness. A bit of onion or bell pepper made it shine, and sometimes a pinch of sugar brought out the sweetness. In neighborhoods where fresh produce was scarce, a can of tomatoes and a bag of frozen okra could still taste like a garden feast. It was humble food, yes, but it had heart, and every stir of the spoon carried the sound of love being cooked into survival. Fried chicken gizzards turned organ meat into crispy, chewy bites that cost almost nothing per pound, but satisfied like expensive steaks never could. The gizzards were thoroughly cleaned, boiled until tender, then dredged in seasoned flour mixed with paprika, garlic powder, cayenne, and black pepper, before being deep-fried until golden brown. The result was crunchy outside with firm, meaty texture inside that delivered protein and iron while costing fractions of what chicken breasts cost at any market. Street vendors sold them in paper bags at fish shacks and corner stores throughout Black neighborhoods during weekends and celebrations. Families made them at home for weekend gatherings, serving them with hot sauce and saltine crackers for perfect combination. In the 1970s, gizzards cost less than 50 cents per pound, making them accessible protein for families on impossibly tight budgets. Fried gizzards represented refusal to waste any part of the chicken, transforming organs into genuinely delicious food people actively craved. Fried chicken wings bought in bulk became the affordable alternative to whole birds, giving families the crispy, golden poultry that made Thanksgiving feel festive without emptying wallets. Chicken wings sold for 30 cents per pound in the 1970s, making them one of the most economical cuts available, especially when purchased in 10-pound bags from discount grocers. Black mothers would season them overnight with paprika, garlic powder, onion powder, and black pepper, then fry them in batches until the skin shattered with each bite. The meat stayed juicy, while the coating turned crispy and flavorful, creating that perfect contrast that made fried chicken legendary in Black cooking traditions. Unlike turkey or whole chickens, wings fried quickly and could be prepared by multiple cooks simultaneously, making them practical for large gatherings. Children loved eating with their hands, while adults appreciated how wings stretched the poultry budget without sacrificing flavor. Fried cornmeal mush was the kind of breakfast that turned leftovers into something special after a night of freezing temperatures and thin blankets. Cornmeal mush was simple, made by cooking cornmeal with water until it thickened into a heavy porridge, but the magic happened the next morning. Mothers sliced the chilled mush into thin rectangles, laid them in a hot skillet, and fried them until the edges crisped and the centers stayed soft. The sound of the mush hitting the pan was quiet but comforting, a soft sizzle that meant a warm breakfast was on the way. Kids loved the contrast in each bite, the crunch on the outside and the creamy middle inside. Sometimes syrup went over the top, sometimes powdered sugar, and sometimes nothing at all because the flavor was enough. It was cheap, filling, and warm. Everything a family needed before stepping out into the cold, fried cornmeal mush was a winter morning ritual that turned scraps into sustenance and taught kids that even the simplest food could be worth remembering. Pinto beans and rice was the meal that never failed to show up when times were tight. It was dependable, like the neighbor who always waved or the church that never closed its doors. Pinto beans soaked overnight, then simmered slow with onions, garlic, and a bit of salt pork if you had it. Rice stretched it further, making one pot feed everyone at the table. The taste was earthy, hearty, and full of quiet strength. No one went hungry when there were beans on the stove. They were the rhythm of the week, the comfort of something warm after a long shift, the proof that cheap did not mean empty. Every spoonful carried history, from southern farms to city apartments, reminding folks that food can be both humble and holy. It was nourishment for the soul as much as the body, and it made even the poorest dinner feel like home. Liver and onions delivered iron, B vitamins, and sustained energy through affordable organ meat that mothers understood was essential for growing children. Beef liver was sliced thin, soaked in milk to remove bitterness, then dredged in seasoned flour and fried quickly in hot skillets with butter. Onions were cooked low and slow until caramelized and sweet, creating natural sauce that balanced the liver's mineral intensity perfectly. Served with rice, mashed potatoes, or grits, liver and onions made complete meals that stuck to the ribs through long days. The smell filled entire neighborhoods, announcing dinner time and bringing families to the table with anticipation and hunger. Many children initially resisted the strong flavor, but persistent mothers knew the nutritional value was worth the battle every time. In the 1970s, liver cost less than half what ground beef cost, making it accessible when budgets were impossibly tight. This dish represented mothers' nutritional wisdom combined with determination to keep families healthy. Sweet potato pie made from scratch with lard crust became the dessert that delivered holiday sweetness without requiring expensive ingredients, turning humble root vegetables into celebration. Black mothers baked their own sweet potatoes until soft, then mashed them with evaporated milk, eggs, sugar, and warm spices like cinnamon, nutmeg, and vanilla when affordable. The filling was rich, smooth, and naturally sweet, requiring less added sugar than other desserts, making it economical and delicious. Pie crusts made with lard rather than butter saved money while producing flaky, tender pastry. Some women topped their pies with meringue made from leftover egg whites, creating impressive height without additional cost, while others left them plain. A single pie cost less than $2 in ingredients, yet could be sliced into 12 portions, making it far more economical than cakes. The pies were often baked the day before Thanksgiving. Grits with red-eye gravy was the kind of breakfast that wrapped around you like a blanket before you stepped into the cold. Grits were cheap, easy, and filling, the kind of food that could keep a child warm through a long school day when the walk to the bus stop felt like a challenge. The red-eye gravy, made from pan drippings and a splash of strong coffee, added a flavor that was sharp and comforting all at once. Mothers made it quickly, stirring the grits until they were smooth and spooning the gravy over the top with practiced hands. The smell alone could coax a sleepy child out of bed. Kids loved how the gravy soaked into the grits, giving each spoonful a deep, savory taste. It was not fancy, and it certainly was not pretty, but it did what it needed to do. It kept families fueled when winter stretched long and money stretched thin. It tasted like early mornings, like care offered quietly, like the start of a day built on strength. Deviled eggs made with extra mayonnaise and pickle juice stretched expensive eggs into appetizers that fed crowds while adding protein to meals that sometimes lacked adequate meat. Black mothers would hard-boil dozens of eggs when they went on sale, carefully peeling them and mixing the yolks with mayonnaise, mustard, pickle juice, and paprika until smooth and tangy. The pickle juice was key, adding flavor dimension while helping the filling stay moist and spreadable without requiring extra mayonnaise. Each egg half became a small, protein-rich bite that satisfied hunger while looking festive and deliberate on serving platters. Children loved deviled eggs because they were handheld and mild, while adults appreciated their versatility as appetizer, side dish, or even light main course when other food ran short. A dozen eggs could be transformed into 24 servings, making them remarkably economical for their protein content. The eggs could be prepared the day before Thanksgiving. Mustard greens with ham hocks delivered bitter, peppery flavors that balanced the smoky pork perfectly while providing vitamins and minerals essential for health and sustained well-being. The greens were cleaned thoroughly, then cooked low and slow with ham hocks, onions, vinegar, and hot sauce until tender, but still maintaining some texture throughout. The bitterness mellowed during cooking, balanced by the pork's saltiness and the vinegar's tang, creating complex flavors that developed over hours of patient simmering. The potlikker was considered especially valuable, packed with vitamins leached from the greens and rich with pork flavor worth savoring. Families served this with cornbread and hot sauce, with children learning to appreciate the bitter notes that many initially resisted eating. In the 1970s, mustard greens grew easily in southern gardens and could be purchased cheaply at markets when homegrown weren't available for picking. Mustard greens with ham hocks represented Southern cooking wisdom, showing how proper preparation made even bitter vegetables into food people actually wanted to eat. Fried hot dogs and rice were the clever man's version of sausage and grains, a dish born straight from necessity. One pack of hot dogs could stretch across 3 or 4 dinners if you sliced them right. Fried in a skillet until golden and crisp at the edges, the pieces were tossed into fluffy white rice seasoned with whatever was around: salt, pepper, maybe a touch of hot sauce. The sound of the skillet was quick and cheerful, the kind of noise that made a small kitchen feel like a celebration. It was cheap, filling, and came together in minutes after long workdays. Kids loved it because it looked fun, and parents loved it because it filled everyone without breaking the budget. Leftovers were rare because no one ever left a bite behind. It was proof that even the simplest food could still feel like comfort. Fried hot dogs and rice may not have been fancy, but in its sizzling, smoky way, it gave families a taste of joy on the hardest nights. Neck bones and potatoes simmered together became winter comfort food that warmed kitchens and filled bellies when cold weather made hunger feel even more desperate and urgent. Pork neck bones were browned first to develop flavor, then covered with water, potatoes, onions, and seasonings before simmering until meat fell from bones easily. The potatoes absorbed the porky richness, becoming creamy and flavorful while the meat turned silky and tender with hours of patient cooking. This one-pot meal required minimal attention once assembled, making it perfect for busy mothers managing multiple responsibilities throughout long days. The bones released gelatin and marrow into the broth, creating body and richness that made the dish feel more substantial than its simple ingredients suggested it would. In the 1970s, neck bones cost almost nothing per pound, and potatoes were among the cheapest vegetables available year-round in any market. Neck bones and potatoes represented making something from nothing, proving that the cheapest cuts combined with basic vegetables could create genuine comfort. Fried cabbage cooked with bacon ends became the vegetable side that tasted rich and satisfying despite costing almost nothing, transforming humble cruciferous vegetable into something people craved. Black mothers would shred cabbage from heads that cost less than 50 cents, then cook it slowly with bacon ends saved from breakfast preparations. The bacon fat and small meat pieces flavored the entire pot of cabbage, making it taste indulgent despite being mostly vegetable. Some women added onions for sweetness and complexity, while others kept it simple with just cabbage, bacon, and salt. The cabbage cooked down significantly, meaning one head could feed 8 to 10 people. Children who normally avoided vegetables would eat fried cabbage because it tasted bacony and rich. This dish represented the kind of flavor alchemy that Black cooks perfected through generations of making inexpensive ingredients taste expensive. Oxtail soup. Back when oxtails were still affordable, was one of the richest winter meals a family could make without spending much at all. Before the cut became expensive, it was something butchers practically gave away, and mothers knew exactly how to turn it into a pot of gold. She browned the oxtails first, letting the fat render and the bones darken in the pot. Then came water, onions, seasoning, and whatever vegetables the house could spare. The pot simmered for hours, filling the kitchen with a smell so deep and savory it seemed impossible that the meal had cost so little. As the soup cooked, the gelatin from the bones melted into the broth, giving it a thickness that warmed the body and soothed the spirit. Kids waited for the moment when the meat fell off the bone with barely any effort, soft and tender from the long, slow heat. The soup stretched across days, tasting better each time it was reheated. It was rich, nourishing, and comforting, the kind of food that helped families push through the coldest months with something warm in their bellies. Oxtail soup was winter elegance built from scraps. Lima beans with ham and tomatoes created summer dishes that combined fresh vegetables with smoked pork in ways that made even vegetable-hating children clean their plates completely. Fresh or frozen lima beans were simmered with ham pieces, tomatoes, onions, and peppers until the beans were creamy and the tomatoes had broken down into sauce coating everything. The acidity from tomatoes balanced the beans' starchiness, while the ham added smokiness and salt that brought all flavors together into cohesive whole. This one-pot meal required minimal supervision once assembled, making it perfect for hot summer days when standing over stoves felt absolutely unbearable. The dish was nutritious and filling, providing protein, fiber, and vitamins all in one bowl served over rice for complete meals. In the 1970s, lima beans were garden staples that families grew themselves or purchased frozen in bulk economically at stores. Lima beans with ham and tomatoes represented seasonal cooking and the satisfaction of eating fresh produce prepared simply but deliciously. Canned sardines with crackers and mustard were the no-cook meal that kept hunger away when the stove stayed cold. It was the supper of night shifts, factory breaks, and long days that never seemed to end. You peeled back the tin, spread the fish on saltines, added a dab of mustard, and called it dinner. It was sharp, salty, and strangely comforting. People who ate this did not care about appearances. They cared about surviving another day. The tang of mustard, the crunch of crackers, the oil of the sardines. It all came together in quiet satisfaction. It was the food of those who refused to quit. In a world that gave them little, they made do with what they had and made it taste like perseverance. Red rice with sausage brought Gullah traditions into urban Black kitchens, creating one-pot meals that combined African cooking techniques with American ingredients in uniquely flavorful and satisfying ways. Long grain rice was cooked with smoked sausage, tomatoes, onions, peppers, and spices until the rice absorbed all the liquid and turned deep red throughout. The dish was savory, slightly spicy, and deeply satisfying, with each grain of rice coated in tomato richness and sausage fat for maximum flavor. This wasn't just food, but cultural heritage, connecting coastal African Americans to West African jollof rice through centuries of adaptation and survival across oceans. Families served this at celebrations, church dinners, and regular weeknight meals when rice and sausage were all the budget allowed for feeding everyone. In the 1970s, rice was among the cheapest starches available, and smoked sausage provided maximum flavor from minimal meat for economical cooking. Red rice with sausage represented cultural continuity and African heritage, surviving through food traditions that connected past to present. Rutabaga mashed with potatoes stretched expensive produce while adding nutrition and flavor complexity that plain mashed potatoes couldn't match, making economical side dishes feel more sophisticated. Rutabaga sold for pennies per pound since few shoppers knew how to prepare them. but Black mothers understood that these dense root vegetables could extend potato dishes while adding vitamins and slight sweetness. The rutabaga was peeled, cubed, and boiled alongside potatoes until both were tender, then mashed together with margarine and milk until smooth and creamy. The golden color was prettier than plain white potatoes, while the flavor had subtle sweetness and earthiness that made the dish more interesting. Children often couldn't tell they were eating rutabaga mixed in, accepting it as simply mashed potatoes without resistance. Adults appreciated how one rutabaga could replace half the potatoes needed, cutting costs significantly while actually improving the dish. Chicken backs and rice were one of the most practical winter meals mothers relied on when the prices of better cuts climbed too high to touch. Chicken backs were cheap, sometimes the only poultry a family could afford, but they carried enough meat and flavor to build an entire pot around. Mothers simmered them with onions and seasoning until the bones loosened and the broth turned golden. Then came the rice, poured in generously because rice made everything stretch. Kids would watch the pot grow fuller and fuller as the grains absorbed the broth. The chicken pieces were small, but the flavor was big enough to make the whole meal feel complete. It was warm, filling, and steady, the kind of dish that felt like a blessing when the weather outside refused to let up. Chicken backs and rice were proof that a mother could take almost nothing and turn it into enough. It was winter courage served in a bowl. Red rice cooked with tomato paste and sausage scraps became the colorful, flavorful dish that combined starch and protein in one economical pot that fed crowds with minimal effort. Black mothers would brown whatever sausage pieces were available, then cook rice directly in tomato paste thinned with water, creating dish with vibrant color and savory depth. The tomato paste was economical, costing less than fresh tomatoes while providing concentrated flavor that transformed plain rice into something special. Onions, peppers, and celery added when affordable, but the core remained rice, tomato paste, and whatever meat scraps could be found. This one-pot meal required minimal cleanup, crucial consideration when cooking for 20 people in small kitchens with limited hot water. The rice absorbed all the flavors as it cooked, creating a cohesive dish where every bite tasted complete. Red rice represented Gullah and Low Country traditions that many Black families carried with them during the Great Migration. Oxtail stew transformed the tail of cattle into fall-off-the-bone tender meat swimming in rich, gelatinous gravy that coated everything perfectly when served over white rice. The oxtails were browned first to develop deep flavor, then slowly braised with onions, carrots, celery, tomatoes, and red wine or broth for hours until the meat became incredibly tender and rich. The bones released collagen and marrow, thickening the sauce naturally and creating richness that couldn't be achieved any other way with cheaper ingredients. This wasn't quick food, but patient food, requiring hours of low heat to transform tough connective tissue into silky texture worth waiting for. Families served this on special occasions despite the humble ingredient because the preparation demanded time and attention that showed love clearly. In the 1970s, oxtails were considered throwaway cuts that butchers sold cheaply, perfect for Black families who understood their potential for transformation into something special. The dish represented culinary alchemy, showing how time, technique, and patience could transform the least desirable cuts. Hot water cornbread with beans was a meal made from ingenuity and routine. When the oven was too expensive to use and flour too hard to find, folks made do on the stovetop. Cornmeal, boiling water, and salt were all it took to fry golden rounds that sizzled crisp around the edges. Served beside a pot of seasoned beans, it became dinner good enough to forget hard times for a little while. It was soft inside, crunchy outside, and perfect for soaking up every drop of bean broth. That combination filled stomachs and lifted spirits, proof that poverty never stood a chance against a skilled cook with a hot pan. The sound of the cornbread frying was like music, sharp, rhythmic, and alive. Children watched as their mothers flipped each piece, timing it by instinct. Sometimes a little sugar was added, sometimes a sprinkle of pepper, but the result was always the same. Simple joy on a plate. Even when cupboards looked bare, a bag of cornmeal could turn a kitchen into a place of plenty. It was survival disguised as comfort, the kind of meal that told the world that love could still taste golden and crisp. Chitlins with hot sauce represented both celebration food and survival food, the ultimate nose-to-tail eating that wasted nothing from the hog. Pork intestines required hours of meticulous cleaning and preparation before being slowly boiled with onions, garlic, bay leaves, and vinegar until tender enough to eat. The process was labor-intensive, and the smell was unmistakable, filling entire city blocks and announcing that someone was cooking chitlins with pride. Despite the strong aroma, properly prepared chitlins had unique flavor and texture that devotees genuinely loved, especially with hot sauce and vinegar cutting through richness. They were traditionally served during holidays and special occasions, particularly around New Year's, connecting directly to slavery survival strategies. In the 1970s, chitlins remained affordable protein that fed large gatherings without breaking limited budgets for celebration. The preparation was often communal activity, with women gathering to clean and cook together while sharing stories. Chitlins represented cultural continuity, proving that even foods born from oppression could become sources of pride. Creamed corn made from canned corn and evaporated milk became the sweet, creamy side dish that children especially loved, prepared from affordable ingredients that most households kept in pantries. Black mothers would drain canned corn, then simmer it with evaporated milk, butter, or margarine, and a touch of sugar until it thickened into rich, creamy consistency. Some added a sprinkle of black pepper for contrast, while others kept it sweet and simple to please children who might reject more complex flavors. The evaporated milk created richness without requiring expensive heavy cream, making this dish accessible even to families on tight budgets. A single can of corn could be stretched to serve 8 people when prepared this way, and most families needed only 3 or 4 cans for Thanksgiving gatherings. The dish was make-ahead friendly, reheating beautifully without separating or losing its creamy texture. Sweet potato hash was one of those winter meals that carried families through the longest, coldest evenings when the house felt drafty and the money was already gone. Sweet potatoes lasted for months if you stored them right, tucked into a cool corner where they held on, even when everything else spoiled. Mothers peeled them, chopped them into thick cubes, and tossed them into a skillet with onions sizzling in a little oil. The smell was deep and earthy, the kind of scent that settled low in the air and made kids drift into the kitchen to see if dinner was almost ready. As the potatoes softened and browned, the onions melted into them, giving every bite a sweetness mixed with a little sharpness that warmed you from the inside out. Kids loved scraping the crispy bits from the bottom of the pan, the ones that tasted smoky and rich like they had been cooked just for them. It was a full skillet meal that cost nearly nothing but felt like something made with intention and care. Sweet potato hash was a dish that held families steady during hard winters, reminding everyone that simple food could still be comforting, filling, and memorable. It was warmth you could taste, survival you could savor, and one more example of how Black households in the 1970s turned everyday ingredients into lifelines. Carrot and raisin salad made with minimal mayonnaise became the sweet, crunchy side dish that added color and nutrition without requiring cooking or expensive ingredients. Black mothers would buy carrots by the bag when on sale, shredding them by hand or with graters borrowed from neighbors, then mixing them with raisins that provided natural sweetness. The mayonnaise was used sparingly, just enough to coat everything, while lemon juice or vinegar added brightness. This cold salad was perfect for crowded refrigerators since it took up little space and actually tasted better after sitting overnight. Children loved the sweetness from raisins and the satisfying crunch of fresh carrots, making it one of the few vegetable dishes that didn't require cajoling. Adults appreciated its versatility, serving it as side dish, light dessert, or even breakfast the next morning. Carrot and raisin salad proved that simple combinations of affordable ingredients could create dishes that delighted across generations. Cornbread dressing made from scratch became holiday tradition that stretched expensive turkey into meals feeding extended families gathering from across cities and states for celebration. Day-old cornbread was crumbled and mixed with sautéed onions, celery, sage, chicken broth, and eggs, then baked until golden on top and creamy inside with perfect texture. This wasn't stuffing cooked inside the bird, but southern dressing baked separately in pans, allowing better control over texture and flavor throughout. The cornbread absorbed the broth and seasonings, becoming savory and moist with crispy edges that everyone fought over at dinner tables. Families made huge pans because this was as important as the turkey itself, sometimes more important given its cultural significance to gatherings. In the 1970s, cornmeal was cheap enough that making cornbread for dressing didn't stress budgets even during expensive holiday meals celebrated properly. Each family had their own variations, with recipes guarded and passed down through generations of women who took pride in their dressing. Cabbage and egg stir-fry was a one-pan wonder for people who knew how to stretch every bit of food. A single head of cabbage, shredded thin, cooked down soft with a couple of beaten eggs cracked right into the pan. Salt, pepper, and maybe a splash of hot sauce were all the flavor it needed. It was light but filling, fast but homemade. The sizzling sound filled kitchens across small southern towns, a song of thrift and resourcefulness. Some added leftover rice to make it go farther, turning it into a full meal. Others ate it with cornbread and called it supper. Cabbage and egg stir-fry was not just quick, it was clever. It showed that skill, not money, made good cooking. Even now, old-timers remember the smell of it frying, and the pride that came with knowing you could feed your family with almost nothing. It was the kind of recipe that was never written down, passed instead through memory and repetition. Mothers taught daughters the timing, the turning, the feel of the pan. The taste was simple, but it stuck with you, reminding everyone who ate it that survival could be beautiful when cooked with heart. Fried pork skin, also called cracklings, provided crunchy, salty snacks that satisfied cravings while using the pig's skin that would otherwise be completely discarded as useless waste. The skin was cut into strips, boiled briefly, then fried in its own rendered fat until it puffed up and turned crispy golden brown all over. The result was intensely porky, crunchy, and addictively salty, eaten by the handful like chips, but providing protein and fat that kept people satisfied longer. These appeared at gatherings, in paper bags at corner stores, and as homemade snacks when families butchered their own hogs for winter meat. The cracklings were also crumbled over greens, mixed into cornbread batter, or eaten alongside beans for added richness and satisfying texture throughout meals. In the 1970s, pork skin cost nearly nothing since most people threw it away without realizing its potential for transformation into snacks. Fried pork skin represented ultimate resourcefulness, finding value in what literally everyone else considered garbage and transforming it into genuinely delicious food. Dinner rolls made from scratch using leftover mashed potatoes became the soft, pillowy bread that absorbed gravy and made meals feel complete without buying expensive bakery items. Black mothers discovered that adding mashed potatoes to bread dough created rolls with incredible softness and moisture that stayed fresh for days, perfect for holiday meals where food needed to last. A single potato combined with flour, yeast, and minimal butter produced dozens of rolls that cost pennies compared to store-bought options. The dough was easy to work with, forgiving for inexperienced bakers, and could be shaped into various sizes depending on how many people needed feeding. Children loved pulling apart warm rolls to watch the steam escape, while adults appreciated how the potato rolls stayed soft even when served hours after baking. These rolls represented kitchen wisdom that turned leftovers and scraps into something families actively requested. Cornbread and potlikker was a winter lifeline, the kind of dish that carried a deeper history than most people realized. Potlikker was the broth left behind after cooking greens, and in many families it was considered just as valuable as the greens themselves. Thick, salty, and full of nutrients, it became a meal all on its own when paired with a slice of fresh cornbread. Mothers would crumble the cornbread into the potlikker or pour the broth directly over the bowl, letting it soak until the edges softened. Kids loved it more than they ever admitted, especially on nights when the cold felt sharp and the house needed something warming. It was simple food, but it tasted like something older, something that came from the days when nothing was wasted because nothing could be potlikker filled you up in a way that made your whole body feel steadier. Cornbread gave it something to cling to, turning a thin broth into a full meal. It was winter resilience in a bowl, humble but powerful. No matter how tight groceries got, this dish always came through. Fried cornmeal mush was a meal that stuck to your ribs and your memories. Made from cornmeal, water, and salt, it was poured into a pan, cooled, then fried into golden slabs that crisped on the outside and stayed soft in the middle. It was a Depression-era recipe that refused to die, a cheap staple that carried over into the 1970s because it worked. Kids ate it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, sometimes with syrup, sometimes plain. The sound of it sizzling in a skillet was the soundtrack of 1,000 kitchens. It was food that made do without apology. In a world that measured worth by what you had, fried cornmeal mush was the quiet reminder that even the simplest meal could feel rich. People learned that comfort came from creativity, not cost. Pickled pig's feet were treasured treats appearing at celebrations and family gatherings whenever someone wanted to honor Southern traditions and ancestral heritage. Fresh pig's feet were thoroughly cleaned, boiled until tender, then packed into jars with hot spiced vinegar, onions, bay leaves, and peppercorns for long preservation. After weeks of curing, the feet developed complex, tangy flavors, while the vinegar turned the meat silky and gelatinous with unique texture. They were eaten cold, straight from jars, with bones pulled clean and every bit of meat and skin consumed without waste. The gelatinous texture was considered especially nourishing, believed to be good for joints and overall health when consumed regularly. In the 1970s, pig's feet cost almost nothing because most Americans avoided them completely, making them perfect for Black families honoring traditional foodways passed down through generations. The preparation required skill and patience, with experienced cooks knowing exactly how long to boil and which spices created perfect balance. Black-eyed peas cooked with onions and bacon fat carried both flavor and cultural significance, representing good fortune traditions that connected families to their Southern roots and African heritage. Black mothers prepared black-eyed peas for Thanksgiving as practice for New Year's Day when they'd serve them for luck, creating consistency in holiday cooking that children recognized and anticipated. The peas themselves cost less than beans, making them even more economical, and they cooked faster while still providing complete protein when served alongside cornbread or rice. Bacon fat, saved throughout the year, seasoned the peas with smoky richness, while onions added sweetness and depth that made even simple preparations taste complex. Some families added tomatoes or peppers when available, but the core remained peas, onions, and pork fat, simmered until tender. Children grew up associating black-eyed peas with celebration and family, understanding that these humble legumes carried meaning beyond mere nutrition. Pinto beans and ham hock were one of the most dependable winter meals a Black family could make in the 1970s, a pot that simmered slow and steady while the cold pressed against the windows. Pinto beans were cheap and came in big bags that could last for several meals, and a single ham hock turned them into something hearty and deeply flavored. Mothers soaked the beans overnight when they could, then dropped them into a large pot with onions, water, and the ham hock sitting right in the center like a small anchor holding everything together. As it simmered for hours, the ham hock released its salt and smoke, and the beans drank it in until the whole pot thickened into something that felt like warmth itself. Kids wandered in and out of the kitchen, asking if it was ready yet, even though they knew it never was until dinner time. When it finally came together, it filled bowls with a richness that did not match the price of the ingredients served with rice or cornbread. It stretched for days, and each day tasted deeper than the last. Pinto beans and ham hock were a winter promise that no one would go to bed hungry. Fried cabbage and potatoes was the smell of thrift and warmth rolled into one. The sizzle of sliced potatoes hitting the skillet mingled with the sound of cabbage crackling as it softened. It was a poor man's stir-fry, made with nothing fancy but full of flavor. Sometimes bacon grease or a strip of fatback turned the whole thing smoky, rich, and satisfying. The meal came together fast, just a handful of ingredients, but it fed everyone around the table. Children knew this dinner meant it was almost payday. when everything left in the pantry came together for one last meal. It was humble food, but every bite was seasoned with care. What made it special was not what it cost, but the way it could make a home feel full again, even when the shelves were bare. The pan clattered, the scent rose, and people gathered close without being called. The potatoes browned to perfection, the cabbage wilted into silk, and suddenly poverty felt far away. The laughter that filled the room tasted better than any feast. Fried cabbage and potatoes might not have been much to look at, but it carried dignity in every bite. It turned scraps into satisfaction and made sure no one went to bed hungry. Salmon croquettes stretched single cans into crispy patties, feeding 6 people for less than $1, proving that canned goods could become genuinely delicious meals. The salmon was drained, mashed with breadcrumbs, eggs, onions, and seasonings including black pepper, garlic powder, and hot sauce, then shaped into patties. These were fried in hot oil until golden brown and crispy outside while staying moist inside, providing omega-3 fatty acids and protein when fresh fish was completely unreachable. Mothers made them for dinner alongside macaroni and cheese or greens, creating meals that satisfied both hunger and budget constraints simultaneously. Children often requested these specifically, finding comfort in their familiar taste and satisfying crunch. In the 1970s, canned salmon was an affordable pantry staple that didn't require refrigeration, making it practical for families without reliable power. Salmon croquettes represented smart shopping meeting creative cooking, proving that thrift didn't mean sacrifice, just resourcefulness applied to available ingredients. Fried chicken livers with hot sauce delivered iron-rich organ meat in forms that even children would eat, especially when coated in seasoned flour and fried crispy golden brown. The livers were soaked in buttermilk to remove any bitterness, dredged in flour mixed with paprika, garlic powder, and cayenne, then fried quickly in hot oil until perfectly cooked. The result was crispy outside with creamy, almost mousse-like interior that melted in the mouth when cooked properly without overcooking into grainy texture. These provided concentrated nutrition, including iron, B vitamins, and protein in affordable packages costing less than $1 per pound at markets. Families served them as main dishes or snacks, with hot sauce being mandatory for many who loved the spicy, rich combination that made them addictive. In the 1970s, chicken livers were considered poor people's food that wealthier families avoided completely, meaning they stayed affordable and accessible for struggling families. Fried chicken livers represented nutritional wisdom disguised as soul food, proving that the cheapest cuts often delivered the most essential nutrients. Giblet gravy made from turkey or chicken organ meats transformed parts that many discarded into rich, flavorful sauce that elevated every dish it touched. When families could afford even a small bird, Black mothers saved the neck, liver, heart, and gizzard, chopping them fine and simmering them with onions and celery until tender. The organs added depth and richness that plain flour gravy could never match, creating sauce with body and complexity that tasted like hours of work. Some women strained out the meat pieces for texture-sensitive children, while others left everything in for those who appreciated authentic preparations. The gravy was thickened with flour mixed into the drippings, creating perfect consistency that coated everything without being gluey. Poured over dressing, mashed potatoes, rice, or biscuits, giblet gravy made every component taste richer. This was resourceful cooking at its finest, using parts that cost nothing extra. Sorghum syrup oatmeal was a winter breakfast that stuck with you, warming you from the inside out before school or chores called you into the cold. Oats were inexpensive and dependable, and sorghum syrup added a deep, earthy sweetness that made the meal feel more special than it cost to make mothers cook the oats slowly until they thickened, then drizzled the syrup over the top so it melted into the warm bowl. Kids stirred it in eagerly, watching the syrup swirl through the oats until the whole thing turned golden. Each bite was sweet, hearty, and comforting, the kind of breakfast that kept your stomach full well into the afternoon. It tasted like quiet mornings in a warm kitchen while frost gathered on the windows. Sorghum syrup oatmeal was a winter gift, simple but memorable. Leftover turkey sandwiches planned from the beginning ensured that Thanksgiving dinner stretched into multiple meals, with mothers deliberately cooking extra, knowing that day-after sandwiches were part of the tradition. When families could afford turkey, Black mothers bought the smallest birds that would serve immediate needs while leaving enough for sandwiches. The leftover meat was sliced thin and layered on homemade biscuits or potato rolls with mayonnaise and cranberry sauce, creating sandwiches that tasted almost as good as the original meal. Children actually preferred these casual sandwiches to formal sit-down dinners, eating them while watching television. Adults appreciated how turkey sandwiches extended the Thanksgiving experience without requiring additional cooking. This planned-overs approach represented forward thinking that characterized Black household management during difficult times, ensuring maximum value. Hopping John, served at midnight on New Year's Eve, embodied hope and superstition blended with practical economics, as black-eyed peas, rice, and pork came together in tradition-laden celebrations. The peas were cooked with rice, smoked pork, onions, and peppers until everything melded into one unified dish with layers of texture and deep flavor. This wasn't just food, but ritual, with families believing that eating Hopping John at the year's start ensured prosperity throughout coming months ahead. The tradition likely originated with enslaved Africans who combined West African rice cooking techniques with ingredients available on plantations for survival and celebration. In the 1970s, the dish remained affordable because black-eyed peas and rice were among the cheapest staples available in any store. Families made enormous pots, knowing that leftovers meant extended good luck rather than waste that would bring bad fortune. Hopping John represented cultural continuity, African heritage meeting American survival, creating something uniquely Black American that sustained both bodies and spirits. Cornbread and buttermilk was the simplest supper there was, but it carried the most meaning. On hot southern nights, folks would crumble leftover cornbread into a glass or bowl, pour cold buttermilk over it, and eat it with a spoon. No stove, no fuss, just comfort. It was cooling, filling, and deeply tied to home. This dish was about making do with what was left, turning yesterday's bread into tonight's meal. It was humble, but it was also history. A reminder that even in hardship, people found ways to sit down and share a moment of peace. The tang of the buttermilk mixed with the sweetness of the cornbread, creating a flavor that was both sharp and soothing. Old folks swore it could fix almost anything: a tired body, a hungry stomach, or a heavy heart. It was the taste of endurance and gratitude, simple as it was sacred. Fried pork chops smothered in gravy turned inexpensive bone-in chops into Sunday dinner centerpieces that made families feel like they were eating something truly special and celebratory. The chops were seasoned generously with salt, pepper, garlic powder, and paprika, dredged in flour, then fried in hot oil until golden brown and crispy all over. After removing the chops, the same skillet was used to make gravy from the drippings, flour, and milk, creating rich sauce poured over the meat. The chops were returned to the gravy and simmered until tender, with the sauce soaking into the crispy coating beautifully. Served with rice, mashed potatoes, or grits, this became meals that satisfied on multiple levels at once. In the 1970s, bone-in pork chops were affordable protein, especially when purchased in bulk from local butchers who knew their customers personally and offered deals. Children eagerly anticipated smothered pork chops, knowing they meant something special was happening that deserved celebration. Potato salad stretched with extra eggs and mayonnaise became the cold side dish that fed crowds for minimal cost, transforming basic potatoes into creamy satisfaction. Black mothers boiled potatoes by the 5-pound bag, timing them carefully so they'd be firm enough to dice without turning to mush, then combined them with hard-boiled eggs that provided protein. The ratio was crucial: enough eggs to make the salad filling, but not so many that it tasted only of eggs, with mayonnaise binding everything together. Mustard added tang, while finely diced celery and onions provided crunch and flavor dimension. The true economical genius came from using potatoes as filler, allowing a single dozen eggs to feed 20 people when stretched with enough starch. Some families added sweet pickle relish for both flavor and the satisfaction of having extras in their salad. The salad chilled overnight, making it perfect for gatherings where oven space was limited and make-ahead dishes were essential. Stewed rutabagas and carrots were a winter staple built from vegetables that could survive long stretches in the pantry without spoiling. These root vegetables were cheap, often overlooked, but they carried a sweetness that only deepened when cooked low and slow. Mothers peeled them, chopped them into thick chunks, and let them simmer in a pot with onions, salt, pepper, and a little fat if the house had any left. As they cooked, the rutabagas softened into something buttery, while the carrots released their natural sugar into the broth. The smell was earthy and comforting, a reminder that winter food did not have to be complicated to be satisfying. Kids sometimes wrinkled their noses at rutabagas, but by the time the pot was ready, they were scooping out big spoonfuls without a second thought. The stew filled the stomach in a steady, grounding way, offering warmth that lasted long after the bowl was empty. Served alone or with cornbread, it could stretch into multiple meals, each one tasting richer than the last. Stewed rutabagas and carrots were a reminder that survival did not always look glamorous, but it always tasted like perseverance and care. That kind of faith turned poverty into pride. The aroma was enough to lift spirits, drifting through screen doors and down front porches. Even the pot itself told stories, passed from grandmother to mother, always filled with the same promise: luck, love, and full bellies. Some swore by eating it on New Year's Day, others made it whenever life felt uncertain. Either way, it reminded folks that good fortune could be cooked right on the stove, one slow stir at a time. For many, the dish became a ritual of renewal, the kind that turned one meal into a memory that never faded. Children who grew up on it would make it for their own families years later, repeating every step the same way their mothers did. The simple act of stirring a pot became a connection to generations past, a quiet thank you to those who survived on faith and beans. Butter beans with ham hocks stretched single pieces of smoked pork into meals feeding entire families for 2 days with minimal additional ingredients. Large dried lima beans were soaked overnight, then simmered for hours with ham hocks, onions, garlic, and black pepper until creamy and rich throughout. The ham hocks released their smoky flavor and gelatinous richness into the cooking liquid, creating thick, savory broth that coated each bean perfectly every time. This combination provided protein from both beans and meat, making it nutritionally complete even though ham hocks were among the cheapest cuts available anywhere. The beans were served over rice or with cornbread, with the potlikker considered precious enough to sip from bowls like soup. In the 1970s, dried beans were pantry staples lasting months and costing less than $1 per pound for family supplies. A single ham hock could flavor an entire pot of beans, making the meat-to-meal ratio incredibly economical for struggling families. Pound cake baked with margarine instead of butter became the golden, dense dessert that could be sliced thin to feed many people from a single loaf. Black mothers would cream margarine with sugar and eggs, adding flour gradually to create batter that baked into cake with tight crumb and rich flavor despite lacking expensive butter. The cake lasted for days when wrapped properly, actually improving in texture as it sat. A single pound cake could yield 24 thin slices when cut carefully, making it remarkably economical for providing dessert for large gatherings. Some women glazed their cakes with simple sugar icing, while others served them plain or with berries when fruit was affordable. Children loved pound cake because it was sweet without being overwhelming, while adults appreciated its versatility. Pound cake proved that basic ingredients could create impressive results. Butter beans with smoked turkey tails were a pot that made the entire house smell like the best kind of winter comfort. Turkey tails were cheap, often overlooked, but they released enough fat and smoke to transform butter beans into something rich and satisfying. Mothers simmered the beans slowly, letting the turkey tails soften and break apart as the pot cooked. The beans absorbed the flavor, turning creamy and thick. Kids knew the smell long before they heard the call for dinner, drifting toward the kitchen with bowls already in hand. The meal was hearty, filling, and stretched across multiple days when money needed to go further. Served with rice or cornbread, it became a winter staple. Butter beans with turkey tails tasted like thrift, turned into abundance. Cracklin' cornbread was what happened when thrift met tradition. Every Southern cook knew the rule: waste nothing from the hog. The leftover bits of fat and skin, called cracklins, were chopped small and stirred into cornbread batter, giving each slice a salty crunch. The smell of it baking filled the house with warmth, the kind that wrapped around you like a blanket. It came out golden, crispy at the edges, and soft in the middle, with little bursts of pork flavor in every bite. Served with beans, greens, or just a drizzle of syrup, it turned scraps into something worth celebrating. The sound of cracklins popping in the skillet was as familiar as laughter after supper. It was proof that even leftovers could taste rich when cooked with care. In homes where money was scarce but love was not, cracklin' cornbread was a symbol of pride, the kind of meal that made folks close their eyes and hum between bites. Corncob jelly was one of those miracles that made people smile at their own cleverness. When the corn was shucked and the cobs left behind, no one dared to throw them out. Those bare cobs went into a big pot of water, boiled until the water turned golden and sweet-smelling. Sugar and a little lemon juice got added next, then everything was strained until the liquid gleamed like honey. The result was a jelly that tasted faintly of corn, syrupy and light, the perfect spread for biscuits or toast. People used it when fruit was scarce, and it carried a quiet pride that came from turning scraps into sweetness. Grandparents remembered it from their childhood, when waste was not an option and imagination ruled the kitchen. Corncob jelly was proof that flavor could be coaxed out of what others might ignore. It was soft, shining, and made with patience. Those who tasted it never forgot that feeling of abundance born from scarcity. Each spoonful told the story of hands that worked hard, saved everything, and still found time to make something beautiful. Macaroni and cheese made from scratch with government cheese became the creamy casserole that turned welfare assistance into something families served with pride. Government commodity cheese, distributed through assistance programs, came in large blocks that creative mothers transformed into dishes that tasted better than store-bought. The cheese had unique texture and sharp flavor that melted beautifully when combined with evaporated milk, eggs, and elbow macaroni bought in bulk. Women layered the mixture in large baking dishes, topping it with extra cheese and sometimes breadcrumbs, then baked until golden and bubbling. The result was dense, creamy mac and cheese that could feed 20 people with just 2 boxes of pasta and 1 block of government cheese. Children loved it because the cheese pulled into strings with each serving. This wasn't bland, watery mac and cheese from boxes, but rich custard-like casserole that required skill to perfect. Black mothers took pride in their mac and cheese recipes. Black-eyed pea soup was the kind of dish that filled the house for days, getting thicker and richer each time it was reheated. Peas were cheap, long-lasting, and dependable, making them perfect for winters when groceries had to stretch far beyond their limits. Mothers simmered them with onions, leftover bones, and simple seasoning, letting the pot bubble low and slow. The smell was earthy and familiar, the kind that drifted through the rooms and made the whole house feel warmer. Kids did not always know what went into it, but they knew it kept them full when the wind outside made the walls creak. By the second or third day, the soup had settled into a thick, hearty stew that hugged the stomach, served with cornbread or rice. It carried families through weeks when money was gone, but determination remained. Black-eyed pea soup was survival food, hope food, winter food. It was a pot that never stopped giving. Okra stewed with tomatoes became the southern side dish that provided both vegetables and sauce, stretching fresh produce into enough servings for large families without requiring meat. Black mothers would buy okra when it went on sale during late summer and fall, freezing what they couldn't use immediately for Thanksgiving preparations. The okra was sliced and cooked slowly with canned tomatoes, onions, and whatever seasonings the cabinet held, creating thick, flavorful stew. Some people loved okra's distinctive texture, while others needed convincing, but most agreed the tomato sauce made it more palatable. The dish was economical because okra was plentiful and cheap during season, while canned tomatoes cost less than fresh vegetables during winter months. This stew provided vitamins and fiber that balanced heavier, richer dishes on Thanksgiving tables, making it nutritionally important beyond mere economy. Okra and tomatoes represented the kind of practical cooking that sustained Black families. Fried chicken livers were the brave man's dinner, rich and strong in taste. They were cheap, sold in bulk, and packed with nutrients that families needed. Dipped in flour, seasoned with salt and pepper, and fried until crisp, they were crunchy outside and tender inside. The smell alone filled a kitchen with the sense of abundance, even when money was scarce. Some ate them with rice, others with bread, and always with pride. They were a reminder that flavor and dignity could be found in the most overlooked places. In small kitchens across the South, they sizzled in hot oil while families talked about their day, each sound of frying echoing like a heartbeat. The taste was bold, earthy, and unmistakably homegrown. Children wrinkled their noses at first, but always came around after the first bite. It was food that made you grateful for what you had and proud of what you could create. Cornmeal mush with butter and syrup started countless mornings as hot cereal that cost pennies and filled stomachs before school or work began. Cornmeal was slowly stirred into boiling water with salt until it thickened into smooth porridge, requiring constant stirring to prevent lumps from ruining texture. The finished mush was served hot in bowls with butter melting into pools on top and cane syrup or molasses drizzled over for sweetness that made mornings bearable. This provided sustained energy from whole-grain cornmeal that kept children focused through morning classes without hunger distracting them. Leftover mush was poured into pans, chilled until solid, then sliced and fried the next morning for completely different textures. In the 1970s, cornmeal bags cost less than $1 and lasted for weeks of breakfasts, making it economically essential for large families. Cornmeal mush represented resourcefulness meeting practicality, showing how basic ingredients could provide real nourishment that sustained entire generations through hardship. Candied yams made with margarine instead of butter became the holiday staple that delivered sweetness without breaking the budget, transforming humble sweet potatoes into something luxurious. Black mothers would buy sweet potatoes in bulk when on sale, often 5 pounds for under $1, then slice them thick into baking dishes. Margarine, significantly cheaper than butter, was melted with brown sugar, cinnamon, and nutmeg to create syrup that caramelized beautifully. Some added vanilla extract or orange juice when affordable, but the core remained simple. The yams baked slowly until softened, and the edges turned sticky with crystallized sugar, creating perfect balance between savory and sweet. Children fought over corner pieces where syrup had thickened into candy-like consistency, while adults appreciated how this dish required minimal ingredients yet delivered satisfaction. Candied yams represented the ability to create holiday magic from basic pantry staples. White beans with fatback were the slow-cooked winter miracle that kept Black families fed long before money ever showed up in the house. A small piece of fatback was enough to transform a plain pot of beans into something thick, smoky, and full of the kind of flavor that made you close your eyes for a second. Beans were cheap and dependable, stretching across multiple days when they needed to, which was most winters in the 1970s. Mothers would rinse the beans, pick out the broken ones, and drop them into a heavy pot with water, onions, and that precious slab of pork that melted down as the hours passed. The kitchen would smell warm and familiar, like hope simmering even when the world outside felt harsh. Kids knew beans meant full bellies, and they were thankful for that, even if they did not always say it. Served over rice or with cornbread, the beans thickened as they cooled, becoming even better the next day. Fatback was cheap, but its flavor made the whole meal feel bigger and deeper. This was the kind of food that did not just feed you once. It lingered, warmed, and strengthened. It tasted like survival learned across generations. Pinto beans, slow-cooked with ham bone scraps, provided protein-rich side dishes that cost almost nothing, yet fed crowds with stick-to-your-ribs satisfaction. Black mothers would soak dried beans overnight, then simmer them all day with ham bones scavenged from previous meals, creating broth that was rich with smoky, meaty flavor. The beans themselves cost less than 50 cents for a 2-pound bag that swelled to feed 20 people when cooked with onions, garlic, and bay leaves. This wasn't quick cooking, but all-day simmering that transformed hard-dried beans into creamy, tender morsels swimming in thick, flavorful liquid. Some women added a pinch of sugar to balance saltiness, while others let the ham bone provide all seasoning needed. Children might have initially resisted beans, but when served alongside cornbread for sopping up potlikker, even picky eaters cleaned their plates. Pinto beans represented economic wisdom passed down through generations. Turkey necks and gravy were the kind of meal that started from scraps and ended like a feast. Bought cheap at the butcher, these bony cuts looked like nothing special, but a few hours in a pot proved otherwise. The meat fell from the bone, tender and rich, and the broth turned silky with flavor. A roux turned it into thick gravy poured over rice or mashed potatoes, stretching the meal to fill every plate. The scent of it cooking could make a house feel alive again. This was not just dinner, it was survival served with soul. The lesson was simple. With time and patience, even the cheapest meat could turn into a meal worth remembering. The bubbling pot filled the air with warmth, calling everyone home before the sun went down. Kids would peek in the kitchen, eyes wide, waiting for the first ladleful. When the meal was finally served, it felt like Sunday dinner, even if it was a Tuesday night. Every bite was tender, heavy with flavor, and lighter on the wallet than anyone could believe. It was proof that comfort did not need wealth, it only needed care. Red beans and rice became Monday tradition, using Sunday's leftover ham bone to create entirely new meals that cost almost nothing but fed families for days. Dried red beans were soaked overnight, then simmered all day with the ham bone, onions, celery, bell peppers, and Creole seasonings until creamy and thick. The long cooking broke down the bean starches, creating natural gravy that coated white rice perfectly while providing complete protein. Mothers could start the pot in the morning and let it simmer while doing laundry, making it perfectly practical for busy days filled with household responsibilities. The dish improved with time, tasting even better the second day when flavors had fully melded together completely. In the 1970s, dried beans cost pennies and lasted months in pantries, making them reliable staples for tight budgets. Red beans and rice showed how yesterday's scraps became today's sustenance, with nothing wasted and everyone fed satisfyingly. String beans canned in bulk and seasoned with bacon drippings provided the vegetable side that stretched pennies into portions for crowds, proving preserved vegetables could taste homemade. Black mothers bought cases of canned green beans when on sale, often paying less than 30 cents per can, then transformed them by draining the packing liquid and cooking them down with saved bacon grease. The bacon drippings, carefully stored from breakfast preparations throughout the year, added smoky richness that made even plain canned vegetables taste slow-cooked. Onions sautéed in the drippings first created a flavor base, then the drained beans went into simmer until they softened and absorbed all that porky goodness. Some women added a pinch of sugar to balance saltiness, while others threw in a ham hock if available. The beans weren't crisp tender but cooked until completely soft, the way older generations preferred vegetables. Children usually won over by these bacon-flavored beans. Cabbage and smoked sausage skillet was the kind of dish that proved you could take almost nothing and turn it into something that fed a whole house without anyone feeling shortchanged. Cabbage was cheap, one of the cheapest vegetables in the store, and it filled a pot in a way almost nothing else could. Mothers would slice it thin, toss it into a skillet with a little oil, and stretch one single sausage link so far that every person at the table swore they got a piece. The smell of cabbage hitting the pan was unmistakable, sharp at first, but softening as it cooked down into something sweet and cozy. The sausage added just enough smoke to trick the mind into thinking the meal was richer than it really was. Kids would hover, waiting for the moment when the cabbage wilted just enough to match the shine of the sausage pieces. It was simple, hearty, and warm, and it filled bowls in a way that lasted through the night, In the winter, when money was tight and the weather felt unfriendly, this skillet kept people going. It tasted like thrift turned into comfort, like a mother's hands doing quiet miracles with whatever she had. It was everyday food that remembered its purpose well. Gizzards and gravy over rice was a dish that took patience, not money. Gizzards were the kind of meat most folks overlooked, tough and chewy unless cooked just right. But when simmered for hours in seasoned broth, they softened into something delicious. The gravy was thick, poured hot over rice that caught every drop. It was soul food in the truest sense, made from scraps and turned into satisfaction. Every kitchen had its secret way of making it right, from adding peppers to browning the flour just so. You did not need fine ingredients, only faith that it would come together. The smell alone made neighbors knock, asking for a taste. It was a poor man's delicacy and a proud cook's triumph. Neckbone stew transformed discarded cuts into Sunday dinner centerpieces that fed entire families from parts that cost almost nothing. Pork neck bones were slow-simmered for hours with onions, garlic, celery, potatoes, and carrots until the meat fell off the bones into rich broth. The long cooking extracted every bit of flavor and marrow, creating liquid that tasted like patience and love combined. Families served this over rice or with cornbread to soak up every precious drop. In the 1970s, neck bones were rejected by white butchers, making them perfect for black families stretching tight budgets. Children grew up knowing that Sunday meant neck bone stew, that familiar aroma announcing something special was coming. The dish represented ultimate transformation, turning what others rejected into family tradition and genuine nourishment. This wasn't just food, but cultural preservation, showing how resourcefulness created meals that sustained both body and spirit through generations of hardship and celebration, combined into single pots. Neck bone gravy over rice became the foundation when turkey was beyond reach, transforming the cheapest cuts into liquid gold that satisfied entire families. Black mothers would simmer pork or beef neck bones for hours with onions, garlic, and bay leaves until the meat felt tender and the broth turned rich. The bones cost pennies per pound at butcher shops, yet held marrow that created gravy with body and soul. Women knew that patience turned scarcity into abundance, letting those bones bubble on back burners from morning until afternoon. The finished gravy was thick, savory, and packed with protein from the shredded meat. Poured generously over white rice, this combination stretched to feed 20 people when turkey could barely serve 8. Children sopped up every drop with cornbread, while adults appreciated how resourcefulness created satisfaction without shame. Neckbone gravy wasn't poverty food, but proof that love and skill mattered more than money. Winter greens and beans over rice was a complete meal built from the most dependable ingredients in a black household pantry. Collards or turnip greens lasted through the cold, and dried beans stretched across days with hardly any cost. Mothers simmered the greens until they were tender, adding beans and seasoning to make the pot richer and more filling. The dish was poured over rice, transforming a handful of simple ingredients into something hearty enough to keep everyone full through the long winter evening. The flavors were deep, earthy, and comforting, the kind of warmth that stuck with you long after the bowl was empty. Kids ate it eagerly because it tasted good, but also because it felt steady and familiar. Winter greens and beans over rice were survival disguised as comfort. String beans canned in bulk and seasoned with bacon drippings provided the vegetable side that stretched pennies into portions for crowds, proving preserved vegetables could taste homemade. Black mothers bought cases of canned green beans when on sale, often paying less than 30 cents per can, then transformed them by draining the packing liquid and cooking them down with saved bacon grease. The bacon drippings, carefully stored from breakfast preparations throughout the year, added smoky richness that made even plain canned vegetables taste slow-cooked. Onions sautéed in the drippings first created a flavor base, then the drained beans went into simmer until they softened and absorbed all that porky goodness. Some women added a pinch of sugar to balance saltiness, while others threw in a ham hock if available. The beans weren't crisp tender but cooked until completely soft, the way older generations preferred vegetables. Children usually won over by these bacon-flavored beans. Caramel cake was the kind of reunion dessert that revealed who in the family had the patience and skill to stand over a hot stove, stirring icing long enough to make it perfect. The cake layers themselves were simple, tender and pale, but the icing was where the magic lived, thick, sweet, and slow cooked until it deepened into a golden brown that tasted like butter warmth and memory. Grandmothers guarded their caramel icing method with pride because it took steady hands and a calm heart to keep the sugar from scorching as it bubbled and darkened in the pot. Once ready, the icing was poured over the stacked layers while still warm, spreading into silky drapes that coated every inch before cooling into a soft caramel shell. At reunions, the caramel cake always looked humble on the outside, but the moment it was sliced, people hurried forward for a piece because they knew the flavor inside carried generations of practice. The icing melted on the tongue with a sweetness that felt deep and comforting, and the cake beneath was tender enough to soak up every drop. Caramel cake tasted like real labor poured into something meant to be shared and celebrated. It reminded everyone that the best desserts came from time, attention, and love stirred slowly over a warm stove. Navy beans and ham hocks were the definition of patience and payoff. The beans soaked overnight, swelling with water and promise before being simmered for hours with a smoky ham hock dropped right in the middle. The smell alone could make a neighbor wander over just to talk. It was food for the body and balm for the soul. Every bite was soft, savory, and rich with history. In small towns, pots of navy beans were shared between families, ladled out with cornbread on the side. The longer it cooked, the better it got. Deep, hearty, and comforting. No matter how tough life was, this dish brought people together. It turned hardship into hospitality, proving that even a pot of beans could taste like home. In every spoonful was a story of strength, survival, and the unshakable belief that tomorrow would be just a little better. The sound of bubbling beans on the stove was steady and sure, like a heartbeat for the whole house. The ham hock released its smoky flavor slowly, transforming plain beans into something extraordinary. By the time supper was ready, the air was heavy with warmth and peace. Everyone ate until they were full, grateful for food that tasted like love itself. Fatback and greens created the foundation of countless soul food meals, with cured pork fat transforming bitter vegetables into something genuinely crave-worthy and absolutely delicious. Thick slices of fatback were rendered slowly in cast-iron skillets until the fat melted out and the remaining meat crisped into cracklings worth fighting over. Collard, mustard, or turnip greens were added to the rendered fat, along with vinegar, hot sauce, and seasonings, then cooked low and slow for hours until tender. The greens absorbed the pork fat's richness, becoming flavorful while maintaining some of their natural bite and texture throughout cooking. The potlikker that resulted was considered liquid gold, sipped from bowls or soaked up with cornbread hungrily. In the 1970s, fatback was among the cheapest items at any butcher, often costing less than butter per pound for families watching every penny. Fatback and greens represented maximum flavor from minimum investment, proving that fat wasn't the enemy, but rather the key. Collard greens cooked with smoked turkey tails instead of ham hocks provided the traditional side dish at a fraction of the cost, turning a bag of greens into nourishment that carried flavor and cultural meaning. Turkey tails, often overlooked and heavily discounted at butcher counters, contained enough fat and smokiness to season an entire pot for under $2. Black mothers would buy 3 or 4 pounds of fresh collards from produce stands where vegetables stayed affordable. The greens were washed repeatedly until no grit remained, then chopped and added to pots where turkey tails had been simmering with onions and vinegar. Hours of slow cooking broke down the greens until they turned silky, while potlikker became broth so flavorful that people sipped it from cups. This wasn't just a side dish, but vitamin-rich vegetables that provided essential nutrients. Families served collards alongside everything else, understanding that greens represented prosperity. Homemade vegetable scrap broth was one of the quiet survival strategies families relied on, especially during deep winter when groceries had to stretch for as long as possible. Nothing was thrown away if it could give even a little flavor. Carrot ends, onion skins, celery tops, bones, and whatever else the house had went into a pot of water to simmer for hours. The scraps slowly released their flavor, turning the water into a warm, nourishing broth that could become the base for soups, rice, gravies, and stews throughout the week. Mothers knew how to coax every bit of goodness out of nothing, and this broth was proof of that skill. Kids might not have understood the magic behind it, but they felt the warmth in every meal it helped create. The broth was cheap, simple, and life-giving during the coldest months, a small act of care that stretched across days. It was a reminder that survival was not always about big meals, but about making the most of every scrap the kitchen offered. Dinner plates assembled strategically with small portions of many dishes created the visual abundance that made Thanksgiving feel special even when individual items were simple. Black mothers understood that perception mattered as much as reality, so they arranged plates with care to ensure everything looked generous. A tablespoon of each side dish, when presented attractively, made plates look full and varied despite containing less food than traditional servings. This wasn't deprivation, but intelligent portioning that ensured 20 people could eat from supplies that might normally serve 12. The variety itself provided satisfaction, as diners experienced multiple flavors even though amounts were modest. Children didn't notice smaller portions when their plates held 7 or 8 different items. Strategic plating represented the invisible labor that Black mothers performed to create holiday magic from limited means. Black-eyed peas with rice appeared on New Year's Day tables without fail, carrying promises of prosperity and good fortune into every household that honored the sacred tradition. The peas were simmered with ham hocks or salt pork until tender, seasoned with onions, garlic, and pepper, then served over white rice for complete protein. This combination wasn't just cultural tradition, but also nutritional brilliance, providing everything bodies needed from simple, affordable ingredients combined thoughtfully. The dish was believed to bring luck because peas represented coins and greens served alongside represented paper money flowing in. Families made huge pots, knowing leftovers meant continued good fortune throughout the year ahead for everyone who ate them. In the 1970s, black-eyed peas cost pennies per pound dried, making this luck-bringing tradition accessible to even the poorest families struggling through hard times. Black-eyed peas with rice represented hope, faith, and belief that following traditions would bring better times ahead, making them psychologically important beyond nutrition. Homemade pinto bean soup was a meal that proved patience was a cook's greatest wealth. Beans soaked overnight and simmered all day, filling the house with warmth and the scent of promise. Onions, salt, and a bit of leftover fat were enough to make it rich. It stretched far, one pot for dinner, the rest reheated for lunch. A family could live off it for days, spooning out bowls that tasted better each time. It was more than soup, it was a rhythm of survival, where every meal meant another day endured. Families learned to trust the slow simmer, to let time do the work that money could not. The bubbling pot told its own story, one of endurance and quiet pride. Sometimes there would be cornbread on the side, sometimes just a spoon and faith. It fed bodies and spirits alike, reminding everyone that a little patience could turn almost nothing into something beautiful. Smothered cabbage with smoked turkey became side dishes so good they often overshadowed main courses, transforming humble vegetables into something truly special and crave-worthy. Cabbage was shredded and slowly cooked with smoked turkey wings, onions, garlic, and chicken broth until tender and infused with smoky richness throughout. The long cooking broke down the cabbage's natural sugars, creating sweetness that balanced the smoked meat's saltiness perfectly every time. This dish provided vegetables and protein together, making it nutritionally complete and economically brilliant for tight budgets. Turkey wings were affordable cuts that delivered maximum flavor from minimal meat, with bones adding depth to cooking liquid. In the 1970s, cabbage heads cost pennies and could feed 8 people when cooked with turkey wings as seasoning. The dish improved with reheating, actually tasting better the next day when flavors had fully melded into cohesive whole. Children who claimed to hate vegetables would eat this cabbage without complaint, won over by smoky, savory flavors. Cabbage and smoked neck bones filled the air with a smoky sweetness that said dinner was near. Every Southern kitchen knew that smell, the kind that wrapped itself around the walls and made people hungry just walking by. The cabbage boiled down soft, soaking up every bit of salt and smoke from the neck bones. It was simple food that turned into a feast when paired with cornbread or rice. In the 1970s, this was survival cooking at its finest. One pot, one stove, one meal to feed a whole family. You did not need much money, just time and patience. The meat was cheap, but the taste felt like Sunday. It was humble, honest food that brought people together. Kids would hover over the pot, waiting for that moment when the lid lifted and the steam hit the air. The dish carried more than flavor. It carried memory, the kind that sticks to your ribs and your heart. Fried chicken wings, before they became trendy and expensive, were the discarded parts of chickens that Black families transformed into crispy, flavorful snacks and satisfying meals. The wings were seasoned simply with salt, pepper, and garlic powder, dredged in flour, then fried until golden and crispy in hot oil or lard that made them absolutely delicious. The skin crisped perfectly while the small amount of meat stayed juicy, creating satisfying bites that disappeared quickly from plates at gatherings. These weren't considered premium food in the 1970s, when most people wanted breasts and thighs instead of bony wings nobody else wanted. That meant wings cost almost nothing per pound, sometimes given away free by butchers trying to clear inventory from coolers. Families made huge batches for weekend gatherings, serving them with hot sauce and white bread for perfect combinations. Fried chicken wings represented finding value in what others overlooked, transforming cheap cuts into genuinely delicious food that eventually became so popular they're now expensive. Baked sweet corn casserole made with creamed corn and cornbread mix became the dish that straddled the line between bread and vegetable, providing filling substance that satisfied children and adults. Black mothers would mix canned creamed corn with cornbread mix, eggs, and margarine, creating batter that baked into something between cornbread and corn pudding. The dish was sweet, moist, and substantial, feeling like comfort food rather than plain vegetables. It could be prepared in large pans that fed crowds, and it traveled well to church dinners and family gatherings without falling apart. Children who normally resisted vegetables would eat this because it tasted more like dessert than side dish, while adults valued its ability to fill hungry stomachs inexpensively. The casserole used ingredients that most households kept in pantries, making it possible to whip up even when fresh groceries were scarce. Corn casserole proved that creative combinations could turn basic staples into family traditions. Peanut butter biscuits were the kind of winter comfort food that made up for the nights when meat was impossible to afford and the pantry looked emptier than anyone wanted to say out loud. Peanut butter was cheap, full of protein, and stretched a long way, so mothers mixed it into biscuit dough to make something heavier, richer, and more filling than a regular biscuit could ever be. The dough came together quickly, soft and slightly sticky, and once it hit the oven, the whole house filled with a smell that felt like a blanket wrapped around your shoulders. Kids waited for them to come out hot and golden, hoping to be the first to split one open and watch the steam rise. Sometimes syrup went on top, sometimes jelly, sometimes just a pat of butter if there was any left. No matter how they were served, the biscuits were warm, thick, and comforting in a way that made you forget for a moment how tight things were. Each bite had that nutty flavor that stuck to the top of your mouth just long enough to make you smile. They were cheap, reliable, and exactly the kind of food that kept families going through long winters when the cold pressed in from every wall. Peanut butter biscuits tasted like care made visible. Fried bologna and onions was the kind of meal that reminded people that flavor could come from almost nothing. A single slice of bologna, fried until the edges curled like a flower, filled the whole kitchen with that familiar salty smell. It sizzled in the old pan beside thin slices of onion that softened and turned golden, sweetening as they cooked. Some people laid it on white bread, others on biscuits, and a few ate it plain with mustard. It was the taste of a long day's work, the hum of conversation, and laughter over chipped plates. The bologna might have been cheap, but the pride behind that frying pan was not. Families made this after the paycheck ran out, after rent was paid, when the fridge was nearly empty but spirits stayed high. It was food for the tired, the hopeful, and the proud, people who refused to let hunger take away their joy. Kids grew up thinking the smell of frying bologna meant love, because in a way, it did. That sizzling sound meant dinner was ready, no matter how little there was to cook. Fried Spam with eggs became breakfast solution when bacon was too expensive, and families needed protein to start long days of work and school right. Spam was sliced thick and fried until the edges caramelized and crisped while the center stayed tender, creating textural contrasts that made the processed meat more interesting and actually delicious. Eggs were fried in the same pan, picking up the salty, meaty flavors from the Spam's rendered fat for perfect combination. Together, they created breakfast that provided sustained energy and cost less than 50 cents to feed 4 people every morning. In the 1970s, Spam represented wartime ingenuity that continued helping families stretch food budgets long after rationing ended throughout the country. The canned meat didn't require refrigeration and lasted indefinitely, making it perfect for households with unreliable power or limited storage space available. Fried Spam with eggs represented pragmatism over pretension, showing that feeding your family mattered more than impressing anyone with fancy ingredients or sophisticated cooking techniques. Chitlin dressing appeared on tables when traditional stuffing felt too expensive, turning what others discarded into something deeply satisfying. Cleaned thoroughly over hours, chitlins were chopped fine and mixed with cornbread crumbles, celery, onions, sage, and chicken broth stretched as far as possible. The mixture baked until golden on top while staying moist inside, creating dressing that carried intense flavor and connected families to ancestral cooking traditions. Black mothers prepared chitlins as acts of both economy and heritage, knowing their grandmothers had done the same during harder times. The smell was unmistakable, but for those raised with it, chitlin dressing meant Thanksgiving in ways plain bread stuffing never could. A single batch cost less than $3, yet fed the entire gathering. Young people might have initially resisted, but after that first bite, most came back for seconds. Chitlin dressing taught lessons about respecting traditions. Cracklin cornbread was one of the most satisfying winter dishes you could make with almost nothing. Leftover pork cracklin gave the cornbread a salty crunch that made it taste richer than it had any right to be. Mothers mixed the cornmeal, eggs, milk, and bits of cracklin together, pouring the batter into a hot pan that sizzled the moment it touched the surface. The smell of baking cornbread filled the house, warm and sweet, even before it was ready. Kids loved the crispy edges most, the way the cracklin gave each bite a little extra weight. It was filling, high energy, perfect for nights when the cold tried to seep into the walls. Served alone or with greens, it worked as both meal and memory. Cracklin cornbread tasted like thrift turned into pride, like winter hunger held back by skill and heart. Pig's feet stew was one of those meals that made a house smell alive. The pot simmered for hours, slow and steady, turning tough meat into something soft enough to fall from the bone. With onions, garlic, and a few sprigs of greens, the broth thickened into something hearty enough to stretch across 2 or 3 nights. No one wasted anything, not even the bones, because that stew carried everything a family could afford, and sometimes more. It was made on Sundays, or when the weather turned cold, the kind of dish that drew neighbors to the porch asking what was cooking. The feet themselves were cheap, sold in bundles for less than $1, but the patience to make them tender took skill. This was food for people who had more time than money and more faith than both. The slow bubbling, the steam on the window, and the laughter that followed each bowl told the story of survival done with grace. Turkey necks and rice turned discarded poultry parts into main dishes that provided protein, created flavorful broth, and satisfied hunger with minimal cost or effort required from cooks. The turkey necks were simmered with onions, celery, and seasonings until the meat became tender enough to fall from the bones easily when pulled gently. The cooking liquid became rich broth that was used to cook rice, infusing every grain with turkey flavor and creating cohesive meals everyone enjoyed. Families served the tender meat over the rice with vegetables on the side, making complete dinners from parts that cost almost nothing at markets. In the 1970s, turkey necks were considered throwaway cuts that butchers were happy to sell cheaply to anyone who wanted them without judgment. A pound of necks could feed a family of 6 when served over rice that absorbed the precious cooking liquid completely. Turkey necks and rice represented practical wisdom about stretching resources, showing that every part of poultry had value when prepared properly. Cornmeal rolls made when wheat flour ran short provided the golden, slightly sweet bread that soaked up gravy while stretching limited baking supplies into enough bread for everyone. Black mothers would combine cornmeal with whatever wheat flour remained, creating hybrid rolls that had distinctive texture and flavor, unlike purely wheat-based versions. The cornmeal added slight grittiness and natural sweetness that children found appealing, while the golden color made them look more special than plain white rolls. These rolls required less kneading than traditional bread, making them accessible to cooks with limited time or experience. A single batch using mostly cornmeal could feed 20 people, while using only a fraction of the expensive wheat flour that pure rolls would require. The rolls were best served warm when their texture was softest, though they also held up well for next-day turkey sandwiches. Rice and gravy made from pan drippings was one of the most reliable winter meals mothers turned to when there was not enough food left in the house to make anything bigger. Every drop of flavor mattered in those days, so nothing from a pan was ever wasted. Once the meat was gone, she would take the browned bits left behind, the tiny pieces of onion or seasoning clinging stubbornly to the bottom, and add water or milk to coax out every bit of richness. Slowly, the drippings dissolved, turning the liquid into a thin but deeply flavored gravy that smelled like a full dinner even when it was only a fraction of one. The rice went on the stove next, cheap, filling, and dependable, the kind of food that made sure no one went to bed hungry. Kids watched the steam rise from the pot, knowing that the gravy would soak into the grains and turn the simplest bowl into something warm and comforting. This was winter cooking at its most honest, taking what you had and stretching it without apology. The meal did not pretend to be fancy, but it held families steady through nights when the cold crept through the walls and the fridge felt painfully empty. Rice and gravy tasted like thrift turned into care, like a mother's quiet determination to make something out of almost nothing. Chicken backs and rice showed how far a single bird could go. The backs were the cheapest part, sold in big bags that nobody else wanted, but they held flavor like nothing else. Boiled slow, the broth turned golden, thick with the taste of chicken and onion. Rice soaked it all up, and soon the pot was full enough to feed everyone. The dish was born from necessity, but became tradition. It was not fancy, but it was honest. The kind of meal where mothers seasoned with instinct and love instead of measuring spoons. The bones were picked clean, the bowls wiped dry, and the family left full. This was the art of survival turned into something sacred. Every bite was a reminder that waste was a luxury no one could afford, and gratitude made everything taste better. Pig ears boiled then fried transformed another discarded cut into crispy, gelatinous treats that appeared at gatherings and celebrations throughout Black communities nationwide during warm months. The ears were thoroughly cleaned, boiled until tender, then sliced into strips, breaded, and deep-fried until golden and crispy on the outside with satisfying crunch. The texture was unique, with crispy breading giving way to tender cartilage that had a satisfying chew unlike any other food available anywhere. These weren't everyday food, but special treats that showed up at fish fries, family reunions, and summer cookouts where people gathered to celebrate. The ears provided collagen and minerals while costing almost nothing per pound, since most butchers were happy to sell what they couldn't move otherwise to anyone. In the 1970s, pig ears represented nose-to-tail eating decades before it became fashionable in upscale restaurants charging premium prices. The preparation required skill and patience, with experienced cooks knowing exactly how long to boil and at what temperature to fry perfectly. Buttermilk biscuits served with sorghum syrup became the dessert alternative when pies and cakes felt too expensive, turning breakfast bread into sweet treat that satisfied cravings. Black mothers would make extra biscuits specifically for serving with syrup after dinner, knowing that warm bread with sweet topping could substitute for fancy desserts. Sorghum syrup was cheaper than honey or maple syrup, providing dark, complex sweetness that paired beautifully with buttery biscuits. Children loved this simple dessert because they could eat with their hands, breaking open hot biscuits and drizzling syrup into every layer. Adults appreciated how leftover biscuits from dinner could be repurposed into dessert without additional cooking. This wasn't elegant or sophisticated, but it provided that sense of completion that dessert offered. Biscuits with syrup proved that satisfaction came from simplicity rather than complexity. Collard greens with hog jowl were one of the most reliable winter foods Black families turned to when the cold settled deep and the fridge looked emptier than anyone wanted to admit. Hog jowl was cheap, far cheaper than most other cuts, but it added a smoky richness that turned greens into something powerful. The pot simmered for hours, filling the house with a slow, rising warmth that made you forget how cold it was outside. Kids grew up on this smell, associating it with safety, hunger, and comfort all at once. The greens softened as they cooked, soaking up every bit of flavor the hog jowl released. Served with rice or cornbread, they became a full winter meal that did not need anything else. It tasted like tradition, like resourcefulness, like the kind of food made by people who knew how to survive anything. Collard greens with hog jowl were not just nourishment, they were a lesson passed down one pot at a time. Liver and onions was the kind of meal that tested your resolve before rewarding your patience. The smell filled the kitchen long before dinner was ready, and not everyone liked it. But when money was tight, taste had to take a back seat to nourishment. Thin slices of liver, dredged in flour, hit the pan with a sharp hiss, followed by the sweet perfume of onions caramelizing low and slow. It was a dish packed with iron, one that kept workers strong through long days. Mothers would tell their children, "Eat up, it will put strength in your bones." And they meant it. It was not a luxury meal, but it was medicine in disguise. The bitterness faded as the onions sweetened, turning hardship into something almost pleasant. By the end, plates were wiped clean because waste was not an option. This was food that reminded families that survival always came first, and pride could taste better than comfort. The frying pan became a teacher of patience, sizzling with rhythm and purpose. Families learned that love sometimes wore the scent of onions and the taste of endurance. Even those who disliked liver remembered the care behind it, the scraping of the skillet, the quiet stirring, the sigh of a mother watching her family eat. It was a meal that told a story of strength in silence, proving that even bitter food could leave behind a sweet memory. Fried bologna sandwiches elevated the cheapest lunch meat into something children actually requested, especially when the edges curled up, creating crispy cups filled with mustard and tangy pickles. Thick slices of bologna were scored around the edges and fried in skillets until the center puffed up and the edges crisped and caramelized perfectly. The meat was placed on white bread with yellow mustard and sweet pickle slices, creating sandwiches that were simple but satisfying in ways that transcended their humble ingredients completely. The frying transformed the bologna's texture and intensified its flavor, making it genuinely more delicious than the cold version ever could be. Mothers packed these for school lunches, and children ate them without complaint or embarrassment about their simple nature or low cost. In the 1970s, bologna was among the cheapest proteins available, affordable enough that even struggling families could buy it regularly for quick meals. Fried bologna sandwiches represented treats rather than poverty, showing that simple pleasures didn't require expensive ingredients. Neckbone stew was the kind of meal that held an entire household together when the cold crept in and the money ran out faster than anyone wanted to admit. Neck bones were cheap, sometimes only a few cents, but they carried enough flavor to build a whole pot of warmth around them. If you knew what you were doing, mothers and grandmothers would rinse them clean, drop them into a big pot of water, and let them simmer for hours until the kitchen filled with a slow, steady steam that made the windows fog up. Onions, celery, salt, pepper, and maybe a bay leaf. If the house had one left, all of it went in to stretch the bones into something that tasted rich and full. Even though the ingredients were simple, kids would hover near the stove, claiming they were cold, but really just waiting for that moment when the meat softened enough to fall from the bone with no effort. Rice or potatoes always went on the side because that was how you made a meal last. and nobody ever complained because the stew soaked into everything it touched. It was not fancy, and it did not pretend to be, but it kept bellies warm during winters that felt too long and too hard. Neck bone stew tasted like survival, like patience, like the kind of care that did not need big speeches. It was a winter meal that carried whole families through nights when the house felt drafty and the bills piled high, and even today people remember it with a quiet kind of gratitude. Cranberry sauce, made from whole berries and sugar water, provided the traditional tart sweet condiment without spending money on canned versions that cost 3 times more. Black mothers would buy fresh cranberries when they appeared seasonally in grocery stores, usually paying less than $1 for a pound that made enough sauce for 20 people. The berries were simmered with sugar and water until they burst and thickened into glossy, ruby-red sauce that tasted fresher and brighter than anything from cans. Some women added orange zest when citrus was affordable, while others kept it simple with just berries, sugar, and patience. The sauce could be made days ahead and actually improved with time as flavors melded, making it perfect for busy Thanksgiving preparations. Children loved the sweet tart flavor that contrasted with rich, savory dishes, while adults appreciated the burst of color and acidity that balanced heavy meals. Canned mackerel croquettes were the ocean's answer to tight budgets. A can of mackerel, a handful of breadcrumbs, and some chopped onion turned into golden patties fried crisp in a pan. They were fish cakes for people who could not afford fresh catch but still wanted flavor and protein. The smell of frying mackerel filled the kitchen, sharp but familiar, the kind of scent that let the whole block know supper was on. Served with rice or white bread, they made a complete meal. Leftovers were rare, but when they happened, they were tucked into sandwiches for lunch the next day. It was humble food, but with every crunch came a sense of pride. Poor families made it work, turning canned fish into something that tasted like success. It was not about luxury, it was about love and knowing how to make a dollar stretch as far as a meal could go. The sizzling oil, the golden crust, the careful flip of the spatula, it all felt like ceremony. Kids stood by, waiting for their turn, eyes following every move. Even when times were rough, the sound of frying croquettes promised that life could still taste good. Sweet potato cornbread was the dense, soft, deeply warming bread that made winter dinners feel fuller than they really were. Sweet potatoes were cheap and lasted months, and when mashed into cornbread batter, they added moisture and natural sweetness that made every slice feel like a small treat. Mothers baked it in heavy pans that came out of the oven sizzling around the edges. The smell filled the whole house, rich and inviting, cutting through the cold like a promise. Kids loved how thick and tender it was, especially with a smear of butter if the family had any left. They would tear it apart with their hands, watching the steam curl upward like the bread itself was exhaling warmth into the room. It paired well with whatever else was on the table, from beans to greens to nothing more than a cup of sweet tea, because its strength came from how it made every meal feel larger. Sweet potato cornbread was cheap to make but tasted like generosity, like a quiet attempt to make winter feel a little kinder than it was. Collard greens with fatback was the smell of home in the Deep South. The greens simmered for hours, the fatback melting down and flavoring the pot with smoky salt. Steam rolled through the kitchen while the potlikker turned rich and dark, full of vitamins and stories. Families ladled it over cornbread, wiping bowls clean. This dish was more than food, it was ceremony, a way of honoring the past while surviving the present. In the 1970s, it carried the same meaning it always had: resilience. Even when money was thin, collards on the stove meant everything would be all right. The greens were humble, but they represented everything enduring and good. Canned salmon croquettes were one of the most dependable winter meals because canned fish was affordable and easy to store. Mothers mixed the salmon with onions, egg, cornmeal, and seasoning, forming patties that hit the hot skillet with a satisfying sizzle. The croquettes browned beautifully, crisp on the outside and soft inside, carrying just enough fish flavor to feel special without costing much at all. Kids waited eagerly for them, especially when served with rice or bread on the side. The sound of the croquettes frying was almost as comforting as the smell. a steady reminder that dinner was close and that warmth would soon spread across the table. Sometimes mothers added leftover vegetables or herbs to stretch the mixture even further, turning one can into a feast that lasted the whole evening. It was a meal that tasted far richer than its price suggested, a reminder that skill mattered just as much as ingredients. Salmon croquettes were winter comfort mastered in a pan, a testament to cooking that found joy inside limitation. Chicken quarters baked instead of turkey gave families affordable poultry that still felt special, allowing Black mothers to serve bird on Thanksgiving without spending $20 on turkey. Leg quarters sold for less than 50 cents per pound in the 1970s, and when bought in bulk bags, they became even more economical. Mothers seasoned them heavily with paprika, garlic powder, black pepper, and whatever herbs the cabinet held, then baked them slowly until the skin crisped golden and the meat stayed tender. The dark meat remained moist even with extended cooking, making them more forgiving than turkey breast. A 10-pound bag of chicken quarters could feed 20 people when accompanied by generous sides. The drippings collected in baking pans became bases for gravy, ensuring nothing went to waste. Children actually preferred chicken to turkey because it was familiar and easier to eat. Baked chicken quarters taught families that tradition could be adapted. Stewed chicken necks with dumplings were the kind of meal that reminded people what patience could create. Chicken necks were the cheapest part of the bird, often tossed aside, but families who knew better saw their worth. Simmered long and slow, the necks gave up every drop of flavor to the broth, turning it thick and savory. Dumplings made from flour and water floated on top, soaking in the rich juices until they puffed up soft and tender. It was poor man's comfort food, cooked with time instead of money. The aroma filled the home, drawing everyone to the table. Each bite was a lesson in gratitude, how something once overlooked could become a treasure. Kids loved pulling at the soft dough, dipping it into the golden broth, licking their fingers clean. It was a dish built on love and patience, two things that cost nothing but made everything taste better. Mothers often stood over the pot, stirring gently as if coaxing comfort out of thin air. Steam fogged up the windows, and neighbors passing by could smell that supper was close. It was the kind of food that filled both stomachs and hearts, reminding everyone that joy did not need money. It just needed warmth, care, and a little time. Navy bean and onion soup was one of the simplest winter pots, but it carried a depth that surprised anyone who underestimated it. Navy beans were cheap and filling, and onions transformed with slow cooking until they melted into the broth. Mothers let the pot simmer all afternoon, letting the house fill with a warm, steady smell that made the cold feel far away. Kids dipped cornbread or saltines into the soup, listening to the wind outside and feeling grateful for something hot. The longer it simmered, the creamier the beans became, turning the broth into something silky and soothing. Even the sound of the bubbling pot felt comforting, like the kitchen itself was working hard to keep everyone safe. Leftovers tasted even better the next day, thickened and seasoned by time. Navy bean and onion soup was not glamorous, but it was kind, and sometimes kindness was all a family needed to push through the hardest stretch of winter. Turnip and potato hash was a skillet meal that worked wonders when meat was scarce or simply unavailable. Families would dice turnips and potatoes, fry them together in drippings or lard, and season them with onions, salt, and pepper. The combination produced a dish that was both hearty and inexpensive, making it a frequent breakfast or supper in households trying to stretch limited supplies. Turnips were especially important because they were cheap, easy to grow, and available in gardens or local markets. Blended with potatoes, they created bulk without requiring meat to make a plate feel substantial. This hash was also flexible, with families adding whatever scraps of vegetables they had on hand to improve flavor. Though simple, it offered warmth and familiarity to those who often faced uncertainty at mealtime. Turnip and potato hash might not have been glamorous, but it carried families through tough years and gave comfort with every bite. Rice and tomato stew was what happened when creativity met scarcity. Canned tomatoes were cheap, rice was filling, and together they made something magical. The pot bubbled with tangy sweetness and the aroma of onions, garlic, and pepper. Some added a dash of sugar, others hot sauce or greens, but the heart of the dish stayed the same: simple, affordable, and satisfying. It was dinner for anyone who needed a reminder that warmth could come from the simplest ingredients. Each spoonful told a story of resourcefulness, of families who knew how to make flavor out of struggle. The red sauce clung to the grains, thick enough to feed a table full of hungry mouths. It was a dish that taught patience and gratitude, stirring slowly as the day wound down. Kids waited by the stove, drawn by the smell of tomatoes and home. Even when money was low, that pot brought people together. Every bite carried comfort, a reminder that even the poorest table could still hold pride. Which after-work meal from your childhood still calls to you? Share your memories in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe so we can keep bringing back the flavors that fed hardworking families through the 1970s.